Hello everyone, today we're having our first conversation in French on a theme that isn't yet completely established. We've started with organization and a spiritual, psychic perspective, and the title still needs to be defined more adequately, let's say. Today participating in this discussion are Elisa, Alan, Kripa, Claude, and Bagwandas, and I am Dan. So to start this discussion, in your opinion, are there any qualities that are required or at least desirable for an organization to unfold from a more spiritual, more humanistic perspective, a more psychic space as Mother and Sri Aurobindo would say?
Bagwandas. Just before coming, I must say that since this morning, I've had this question inside me. What could make Auroville regain that energy, that initial confidence now, even if we know we won't go back 56 years, but that thing that made us come here? And just before coming, I see this book Turning Points that was on my bedside table, about Auroville's beginnings seen from the inside. And I thought, that's a sign, we're talking about the inner Auroville. And Turning Points is a book that was made, a compilation by Christine, of press coverage, testimonies from Aurovillians who saw Mother in the beginning. And so this turning of consciousness that was indeed at the origin of many. I would say of this river that was at the origin of Auroville and that animated many Aurovillians. And somewhere, it was created indeed by this encounter with Mother, but the call that made us come to Auroville was already an inner call. And opening it, there was a small introduction, and this introduction really gave me the impression of a click. It's actually about Agni. You are lit, O fire, by the fire. You who are the seer, illuminated, are lit by the one who is illuminated. Companion, you are lit by your companion. And this is obviously from the Vedas, about Agni, this river indeed. In fact, my question is how after 56 years, after everything we've experienced in terms of Auroville's evolution, what could be the elements, organization, activities, created events that could make Aurovillians, who haven't seen Mother, who are even arriving now, experience like a questioning about what makes you come? What is your contact with Auroville? Is Auroville still carrying this inner fire, this deep call from within, from inside, which is actually the essential element to create an organization that speaks from within? Each of us could say that it's not a collective, an external collective organization that can give its true meaning to Auroville. So it's each one of us, but collectively what could be precisely the kind of event, questioning, or document, testimony, that could reconnect us to this dimension and manage to regain contact with this inner Auroville, which is what we came to do.
Kripa, I just want to build on something you said, since you're referring to Aurovillians who came at the very beginning and met Mother. I was part of the entry service from 2012 to 2015, so that's already 9 years, almost 10 years ago. I conducted interviews with all newcomers. Everyone has their own story. Even today, everyone comes with a reason and something that calls them and makes them come here. So I think that hasn't changed at all. In the second part of your question, which is how can the collective continue to support this inner call to come here, and how can the collective organize itself in such a way that it stays alive and can express itself outwardly, I think we'll discuss that maybe now.
Claude. When we talk about organization or governance, for me it assumes a group of people who can organize or decide. So I think the best thing to follow Mother's indications is that those who must take this responsibility should be the most conscious people of a community. Of course, the big problem is how do we determine the most conscious people of a community? I'm not talking about a country because that's already a problem beyond us. It's still doable in a community of 3,000 people. And to come back to my initial question, I also wonder what are the criteria, how can we rather recognize the most conscious people, and how can we choose them? That's the question I'd like to explore further.
Elisa. Already, what's alive in me now? When Bagwandas, you asked the question, how Auroville lives in me actually today and in all those who are connected directly and indirectly to Auroville, there's really a great inner space of calm and it's really an energy, it's really a presence, there was really something. I don't have the reference of the very beginning of Auroville, but I believe we all indeed carry this flame, truly in our own way and in our heart. And even I will carry different colors at different times. So it's really. I really feel it present here when I'm talking to you and since we started sitting together. And I also feel it, as I don't write it, I feel it everywhere. I feel it everywhere around me, in everyone, and it's really interesting how it lives in many, many, many forms and even in forms with which I might not reason or be magnetized. But at the same time I recognize this flame that is truly present in each of us and it touches me deeply. It's really something that touches me deeply in Auroville. There is this field of connection that is vibrant and alive. When I extrapolate to organization, what really comes to me? When I think, for example, in my work about designing decision-making processes, how a group can work together, things like that. What comes to me is, and what would really make me, where I would really have confidence. I don't know if it's a group of people who will be able to de facto take charge of Auroville's organization. I have the impression, and somewhere we've operated with the who for a long time in Auroville, meaning that the people who were in the groups would carry Auroville's interests or would think about them, and obviously in participation with the community. What really speaks to me is, can we establish practices, regardless of the group, or whatever? Can we establish practices where we become conscious of our life together, where we become conscious of our decision-making modes? Because otherwise, from the moment we're a group of people, my experience, with myself, within myself and with others, has been that we fall into the trap of having sometimes burning issues on the table, and we let ourselves get caught, but completely sometimes in ignorance. We let ourselves get caught by the emotional facts precisely of these subjects, rather than setting, as we did here for example for this exercise we're doing together, this discussion, pauses, breaths, going inside, or having really practices that, for me, put at the heart our being, our most psychic dimension, the truest, the most spiritual of the moment, in connection with subjects that, somewhere, are collective, even external. And I see how much, if we start changing our social codes, for me this would really be a big step forward in how we manage and how we organize, and how we also let things emerge organically, according to our state of the moment, and what is felt in the moment, and what wants to be born through us in the moment.
Bagwandas, I resonate a lot with what you just expressed, Alisa. I also think that every Aurovillian who comes, every person who comes to Auroville is carried by something from within, which is this call of their being. The difficulty, I believe, is that our collective organization isn't set up to favor the development of this capacity we should have, the fact that, yes, we have the subject of the heart, to arrive at a form of fraternity, because, after all, I believe Sri Aurobindo said it well, this element of fraternity is what's missing in all human experience. And fraternity has much more to do with the heart than with the mind. I think the collective organization, we quickly fell into the ease of organizing things more at the external level, and not considering enough what Mother constantly reminded us of in all her physical presence at the beginning of Auroville, that is to say organizing Auroville. She had said, the organization of Auroville, the collective organization, is the most difficult thing to do. It's even more difficult than inner discovery and realization. And when she was asked questions about how to organize to avoid constant conflict, as was the case in Auroville at the time it was also the case, she would say, try to have a presence towards others, a capacity to care, to organize Auroville to help everyone be well, quite simply. Mother had the ability to come explain things with simplicity, the most incredible things with a capacity for simplicity. It's incredible for us. Somewhere, that's the point that's most missing from an organization that cares about Aurovillians in terms of benevolence, welcome, and feeling in a fraternity, in a place different from other places in the world, because there's this element that comes. And this element, as Karit said, is the psychic element, the presence of the soul, and he spoke of sweetness, gentleness, benevolence, welcome. And he said, if in Auroville you don't set up a group that has this capacity, maybe Alan, you can correct me, but I think he spoke of a kind of council that would be much more dedicated to this possibility of setting up and incarnating this vibration.
Alan. Yes, indeed. That was one of the things Kirit said. In particular, he said there should be people, a group of people in Auroville, who are aware of the life of all Aurovillians and who care about them, who at least know and do as much as possible to help them. For the problem of entry to Auroville, he said there should be a psychic recognition, that is, developing the capacity to perceive that someone should be in Auroville, because of who they are. Because it's a fact, and I know it was also with a lot of goodwill, it's a fact that we developed very complex processes and also often very difficult conditions to fulfill. At the same time, it's true that the reality of life means that it was perhaps difficult to do otherwise. But it's a question. I believe that this element, this fraternity between Aurovillians, is certainly something that must be part of Auroville's rebirth. I speak of rebirth because we have experienced in recent years something that is a bit like a kind of darkening, which has been quite painful for many of us. And there will be a rebirth, and this rebirth must lead to another way of being together. How? I admit I wouldn't know how to say, but it must be like a preoccupation that we must have.
Kripa. Practically speaking, in fact, we are still a very small village. In a way, when we were fewer, it was easier, because we all knew each other. There were somewhat archetypes, stereotypes, by such person representing such type of person, such person representing such type of person. I think at the beginning, we could almost more see the human laboratory side, with human stereotypes concentrated in Auroville, but with finally the possibility of knowing everyone. The more numerous we are, the less this is the case. And we're not yet numerous enough to be a big city. And there are lots of things to take into account, because India is developing, because Auroville is in India, because there are demands and restrictions of all kinds, administrative, legal, financial, that we have to take into account, because we are in India and we are in a country where we have to respect the laws of the country we're in, whatever the country. And we have to take all that into account while trying to see how we organize Auroville and how we can create this space that must have all the freedom to manifest everything we're talking about. So how do we juggle with an administration that must conform with all sorts of imposed restrictions, while keeping this flexibility of case by case and individuality? So that's what has been largely erased these last 3 years, while trying to normalize everything and impose everything from top to bottom, whereas it seems to me that it's the opposite principle that needs to happen here, that is to say, that it's what happens inside that will have the space to express itself outside. But that's a huge challenge, and the more Auroville grows, the more it will be a challenge. Because even when we talk about a council of wise people, nobody who can be wise, well, we can apart from you, apart from you, apart from us, but there's nobody who fits the criteria of a wise person. And then in yoga in general, we can see well that there can be certain parts of our being that are refined, worked on, deepened, and then there are other parts of our being that go in all directions. When we all know each other like that, we're going to focus on such part of the person. That's not easy to make a council of wise people. How do we choose these wise people? And we're really very, very far from it.
Dan, so, don't you think that ultimately, it could be a question of priority in our lives? For example, if I take this discussion group we're in today, I'm pretty convinced that through the subject topic, through our listening, through our benevolence, through our way of communicating with each other, we could ultimately address any topic. Because whether it's a housing topic or a maintenance topic, because ultimately, through our desire to be together and create something, something has been created that could allow us to address perhaps any topic. So, what comes to mind, and what Elisa was saying earlier, is that at some point, we realize that, wow, something is happening in our group. We're in a form of attunement, or, I don't know how to say it, which means that ultimately, something in us is somewhat detached, and something in us has come forward, something common. I'd like to think it's of psychic nature, but... So, isn't it ultimately, my question is, isn't it ultimately a question of priority if in every act, in every decision, in every thought, in every group formation, in every desire to do this or that, if we ultimately put this search first, wouldn't we? Shouldn't we ultimately have faith that everything organizes itself in the best possible way?
Kripa. I visualize a body, a living body, with each individual being a cell of this body. And at all levels of society's organization, from the moment each individual who joins this society does so consciously and has a conscious approach, the collective organization would and does work, yes, would work completely differently. Mother spoke of a school without walls, a perpetual education, of youth that never ages, of a place where we are constantly in search. So, I see a luminous body, sparkling, full of light, with individuals who are in permanent search. This comes with a change of consciousness. So, the reflection of the organization reflects the state of the individuals who are part of this society. So, we will co-evolve and change and allow things to manifest depending on where we are and in the state of consciousness we are individually in the space.
Elisa. I deeply resonate with this idea. So, in the sense that when you spoke of fraternity and Bhagwandas before you, and precisely this consciousness of the heart, and we talked about this idea of mother, of a council of wise ones, or a council that would somehow be in charge of nurturing, that this fraternity remains alive. For me, what comes to mind, and I'm translating it poorly, paraphrasing it poorly, but what comes to me, when we talk about forming a group, my experience is that as soon as we form a group, there's a detachment from our individual responsibility, from individual powers, to embody the consciousness of this fraternity. And right now in my life, I'm asking myself how I can love better, how I can be a being who opens their heart more and more with the levels of intensity we've known, whether it be in Auroville, or with my family in Israel. And this conflict there, and many other conflicts, we have the impression nonetheless that, well, I have the impression that the ground is ready to explode under my feet, and to keep precisely this axis of, I won't let myself be taken by these illusions of intense separation. On the contrary, I will open more and more, and I will go see what can open me more and more. In the same way that when in Auroville the situation changed 3 years ago, the first question I asked myself was, where is the dictator in me? I really need to look at this aspect, before looking at or labeling external reality. I'm going to see how I perceive things externally, and how I embody it, how I nurture this energy, and therefore, how I nurture the collective body that we are, whether it's in Auroville or our planetary body. So I don't know why, but for me the formation of a group, even if I hear that it has been proposed, I don't know if, but in any case for me today it's really this turning around that you're talking about, that speaks to me, meaning that what I see in the organization, how I nurture them and how it's alive in me. I'm at that stage, I can't afterwards see how to structure. I have a bit of trouble seeing how to structure, but if we should structure, I think we must see what nourishes the group, because wisdom is never fixed. It nourishes itself, wisdom is lived, and I trust that there is wisdom in each of us. But what is it nourished by, and how do we nourish it?
Kripa. There is a wonderful text called The Dream, that Mother wrote in 1954, and it's truly about what wisdom we nourish ourselves with. Every time I read The Dream, I really feel that it's our culture. In the dream, she described the threads that weave Auroville's structure, the organizational structure, the cultural structure, the structure of mentality, Auroville's culture. It's a very beautiful text. And there's another thing too. At the center of Auroville, around the banyan tree, there's a phrase that says Auroville is the city of truth. So, I think about truth, I think about Sat Chidananda, I think about Sat, truth, and when we serve truth and make it our oxygen, joy comes with it. Ananda.
Bhagwandas. Regarding being at the service of truth, at the very beginning of Auroville, Mother asked that instead of saying hello, we say at the service of truth. And I must confess that we haven't been able to say it the same way, because it didn't last long. There were attempts, but it didn't stick. So it's not obvious. Through our sharing, I could say one thing that's evident. After 56 years of Auroville's evolution, if there's one thing we can collectively realize, it's that Auroville cannot be organized through a mental organization from the outside, or even from Aurovillians. For me, this is an observation, and it took us all this time, but I believe it would be a collective realization if we truly became aware that Auroville is something else. It cannot be organized from the outside, it cannot be organized by a force that will impose anything, since it must emerge from within. And when you speak of wisdom. In fact, we have it through Mother and Sri Aurobindo's guidance. It's not us who invent it, they are there. Putting it into practice is work. But in fact, it's fabulous. It's precisely Auroville's reason for being, to embody this approach to truth. So I believe that on one hand, indeed, there could be a collective awareness saying, honestly, all the attempts we've made until now haven't resulted in a collective that pleases us, that makes us happy. So it's something else. And it's something else that indeed, I think we should shift towards. That's indeed a turnaround. The one we had, almost automatically, in front of Mother, because it was a force of love, it's an incredible force of love. Well, it's really an inner effort, but it's because it's a reality, you understand, before her, something fantastic, that turned inside ourselves. But I think it's still possible, and that the collective can have this capacity to help each of its individual components, to have keys of consciousness only, because when there's sharing in the heart, we're happier. When we feel something in us, we say yes, that's what we want to share. And that's the birth of the psychic being. That's what it is for me. It's not this thing with a halo of sainthood, it's just making room for the intelligence of the heart, since the psychic is actually just behind the heart, within oneself, in the subtle entity, but somewhere, it's the heart that will carry and will inscribe our political mind to put in place an organization that will increasingly be inadequacy, no doubt.
Alan. I remember that Kirit had made a remark, when Mother spoke about this group, that could be Auroville's central group. He had said, Mother had said, if there isn't a representative of the Supreme Consciousness, in that case, the best approximation would be a group of 2, 3, 4, 7 people who would have, I believe this is the term she used, an intuitive intelligence. And besides, intuition is more important than intelligence. According to Kirit, Mother didn't know if she would continue to be at the heart of Auroville, and we don't need to question what difference it would have made if Mother had remained at the heart of Auroville. But as she said, she didn't know if she would continue until the end, or how it would be. It's as if she was saying, if I'm no longer there, then the best approximation would be a group like that. I have the impression that if ever there was a capacity in Auroville to consider this possibility, maybe it could be taken as a kind of experimentation. And to say, well, we'll see if we can try to form a group that would more or less correspond to the criteria given by Mother. And then we'll see what it does in practice. Because in a way, I don't know, indeed, I would see it as a kind of reference group. I don't think it can be people who interfere, who take care of everything. It would be more like a collective presence that could indeed play this role of reference.
Dan. What comes to my mind are children, who play let's pretend, and it works because our brain has the capacity to confuse itself and take imagination for reality. So, let's imagine that we're capable of doing it, and that groups create themselves like that, not secret, but further away, creating reflection, and that the capacity, the possibility of pretending, we were capable of making this shift into the unknown, this leap into the unknown, could actually materialize because, if we believe in it, it means we've already done it somewhere.
Kripa. I have lots of ideas spinning in my head, because on one hand, Sri Aurobindo's yoga begins where all other yogas end. On the other hand, people of goodwill are invited to Auroville. We're not asked to be great yogis either. We have an extraordinary project to implement a divine anarchy, nothing less, please ladies and gentlemen. And at the same time, we're completely ordinary people, who dream, who pretend, who do this and that, but there you have it. It still takes quite a lot of goodwill and seriously dreamy people to try to accomplish something in the midst of all this. With all the constraints and limitations once again, we can't just do whatever we want, however we want either. Sometimes we lack, and this has always been the case, an executive power. Because each individual in Auroville, and even when Kirit wrote the Foundation Act with the Residents' Assembly, each resident of Auroville has a say in Auroville's organization. Once again, we come back to this image and this reality in the support of the text that somewhat legislates Auroville today. Each individual who makes the conscious choice to become an Aurovillian and live in this community has a say in how Auroville functions. As for all the internal organization, we can create groups, we can create councils, we can make nominations, we can hold votes, we can do whatever we want however we want. That's part of the experimentation, and we can have fun and play with all that. But it doesn't change the fact that each individual who comes to join this collective body has a say. I find that really interesting.
Alan. On this subject, obviously, when Kirit visualized, imagined, the Residents' Assembly, he told us, well, within the framework of India's democratic state, we need to propose something that still gives the feeling that this element is there. Moreover, he said, I'm not putting any operating rules, and the same goes for the working committee, which was supposed to be the apex body. I'm not giving any prescription of how it should be done, it's the residents who decide. And he was very happy that it was accepted, because he was afraid that the Ministry of Laws would have said, no, it shouldn't be like that. And there were Aurovillians later who said it's really a shame that Kirit didn't give the details. He told me, but Aurovillians don't understand that in fact we're trying to give a space of maximum freedom, and that's why there's the International Advisory Council, whose role is to ensure that Aurovillians have freedom. It's being trampled today, but that was the spirit. And I know he always had this feeling that Aurovillians weren't trying, in his opinion, to precisely try everything we can try, and it's the same for rules. Aurovillians shouldn't hesitate to ask for as many derogations as possible that can be obtained in India. So this spirit of experimentation, I believe he wished for it very strongly. Afterwards, we saw how it worked in our way. And it's true that one of the major gaps that we had to observe is that the Resident Assembly, at the time when the attack came in force, wasn't something very alive.
Bhagwandas. Auroville started in 68, and 68 was imagination in power. So it's about, and we share this, and it actually brings a lot of joy, that on one side there are indeed all the highest, most beautiful references, through the charter, through the dream, to be a true Aurovillian, there are all the writings of Mother and Sri Aurobindo. So we have the knowledge that's there, the wisdom is there, what's missing? Maybe it's this daring play, the capacity of Aurovillians to dare to go beyond the systems that are usually our reference systems, and thus to imagine what you were talking about earlier, Kripa, something that is indeed a collective body that is increasingly luminous, of which we are each a small cell. But somewhere, in my personal experience, when we gather and we're in this aspiration to not have convictions, ready-made opinions, structures that will rigidify dialogue, there's this something that wants to express itself. Maybe when we have children who have played, we do it together, and it doesn't go through the head, it will go through a feeling of well-being. All these things that we have within ourselves, we always carry them within ourselves. We don't dare to share them collectively, we take too often and everything goes away. We all have our share of responsibility. The easiest solution is to refer to the level of mental structures that govern the world, and that have re-enclosed us, each time we've enclosed ourselves in constraining collective structures. So the small flame cannot. Agni needs space, we must make this space for it. Intuition indeed, this capacity for intuition must have place and not be blocked by mental rigidity. So the story of the sages, I really say, I already see quite a few in Auroville, who could do it as a game, but no need to take oneself for a sage. Just do a bit like we're doing here, as you were saying earlier, we take a theme and we let go beyond all our conditions, all our structures, and then we see what emerges. And I find that if collectively we dare to enter into this observation that it's no longer the mind that can direct collective organization, while the mind, I said, the mind, a certain form of mind that we know well, the one that's in polarity, good, bad, etc. But on the contrary, to let something else emerge, I'm sure we'd make giant steps very quickly, and that it would give Auroville a power beyond all other powers. That is to say, really the power that we carry within us, but which isn't revealed in fact, that each one carries within us. One more small thing, we are, now it becomes a bit part of my world, we are spiritual beings, who come to experience matter, the world of matter. We're not projections of matter going towards the spiritual. And that's something that in the world now is more and more present. So we as Aurovillians, I think we should realize that we might need to turn things around, and take back precisely this emotion of being spiritual, all of us, we carry that within us, it's our psychic being. And there you have it, we let it have the place to define the place it must unite.
Claude. When I spoke of a group, whether it's for organizing Auroville, I never spoke of wisdom. I always spoke of consciousness, even as Elaine said, a more intuitive group. I think we need to be quite careful to see the difference, that is, between a very intuitive or very more conscious level of such a group, and then when we go down to execution. When it comes to constructing a building, it's not about saying there are no more rules, We do what we want, because afterward it leaks everywhere, as we say in Auroville. So the mind is useful in execution, so we need to keep that in mind. And then the more we can go up levels and maybe reach a group, but here we're in a group that talks. We're not in a group that realizes. So here we can make intuition work, make the heart work, make other levels work, but we need to be careful to take into account all these levels from the highest intuition to execution. And that means going back down levels. And when we say that all Aurovillians should have their say, I don't know if all Aurovillians should have their say on how to build a building. I don't know. So do they all have their say? I don't know, for me it's a question. It's at one level, Auroville being the symbol that represents all the difficulties of humanity, there are very different levels of consciousness in Auroville. So what does that mean? What does it mean that everyone has their say? I'm not quite sure, I'm asking myself the question.
Kripa. Maybe I need to clarify. When I said that, I never had in mind, and I don't mean that everyone can have their say about everything, at all times, on all subjects, regarding everything. Obviously, I'm not going to stick my nose in others' work and what they do. However, regarding what it implies at Auroville's level, it concerns me as much as you, and as much as all of us here. Then in the execution, I don't have the knowledge, I let you do it. Is that clearer? There is precisely, and I agree with you, and I think it's good that you pointed it out, because there can be this confusion, saying yes, we all have our say about everything. But that's not what it's about. However, indeed, Auroville's direction, if you do something that will have an impact on Auroville in general, and not just on you, we'll say, okay, you're an architect, you're going to make a building. Certainly, there's a building to be made there in this location, but the aesthetics of this building, the materials you're going to use in this building, even if I'm not an engineer, if you decide to use pure concrete when there might be a possibility with more modern materials, I have the right to have that dialogue with you. Because you are an Aurovillian, I am an Aurovillian, you're doing a service to Auroville through your knowledge, and I am in service to Auroville through my knowledge, and who I am. I'm not going to question your technical knowledge. But this discussion isn't inappropriate, knowing that it comes from a space of interest.
Elisa. When I hear us, what comes to me is really, I think that if we come back to this idea of a group, of people who would be in charge, and in whom we feel the possibility to explore this intuitive field of organization, for me, I think that, and we mentioned it, it's really about from what consciousness we would hold this. Because we're not, for me as humanity, we're not healed from capitalism, we're not healed from the flaws of capitalism anyway. And we're not healed from this thing of putting people on pedestals. And so, the danger would be somewhere to have a group to which we refer, once again, by putting them on a pedestal, and finally we reproduce old patterns, because we're once again going to deresponsabilize ourselves onto this group, for organization, instead of finally having an organization that we share. And I believe that somewhere we must go through a phase, well, what speaks to me today, anyway for me, on my path, is that I've so much had the flaw of either wanting to take power, or giving my power away, and now for me it's more about giving power to, what is my power actually, but which obviously goes with my responsibility. And so, can we indeed have fun? I think that's a key word. Can we have fun experimenting, and really be researchers? And at the same time today, it's true that we have resources like technological ones, where we can have sensors, we can have direct feedback on how the community feels, we can have the happiness factor, we can have the trust factor, whether these qualities are nourished. And then we give ourselves living feedback actually, and we feel our collective body, how it feels, rather than presuming, or being cut off from this collective body somewhere. So I just wanted to say that for me, depending on the approach, and the qualities we put into it, and somewhere the consciousness we put into it, I see as much potential for, not great, as for, yes, let's have fun, and try, and see what, let's see. And then indeed, for me this group, and I come back to who participates in what, this group would function on principles, because that's where we have our voice, and it's crucial that we have our voice as residents, it's on the principles on which we function. And indeed, whether it's aesthetics, or whether it's, precisely it's very subjective, but whether it's the systematic, whether it's, there are principles on which we agree, and on the application of these principles. And I think it's very important that we rebuild trust, because we've really lost a lot of trust in our capacity, and our incredible strength, and our incredible richness, of having extremely diverse opinions. And we don't know yet, we haven't developed these muscles yet, of knowing how we disagree, and we say, oh, it's great, we disagree. How can we find something vaster, and with whom else we can put in the disagreement, so we'll find an even richer decision, more beautiful, more brilliant somewhere, that reflects our different colors. So I believe that, even if we talk about a small group, indeed not to forget the beauty, the richness, of this collective body that we are. And somewhere, because of our past, we've lost enormous trust in this capacity to. As soon as we talk about collective process, there was this thing of, oh my God, whereas, in fact, it could be rock and roll, and it could be super rich.
Bhagwandas. Your reflection, Claude, is indeed very important, because when we talk about a group, more in relation to what we call intuitive, and about the most beautiful Auroville we can imagine, the problems arise in its incarnation and manifestation. We agree on this, and I believe we haven't succeeded at present, because I think the majority of Aurovillians agree in recognizing that the dream, the charter, and everything that Mother and Sri Aurobindo said, are things that one can hardly disagree with or oppose. However, the difficulties lie in the implementation, in the incarnation of the ideal. And then, indeed, this descent into the planes of materiality relies much more on the forces of the ego than on the higher mental and intuitive forces. So that's where the test lies. That's where we've always clashed a bit, regarding Auroville's evolution, on the manifestation of the dream in our reality. And at this level, what came to me, through this sharing that happened in pre-delegation, is that I think I might understand why Mother said that. That it would be easier when we were numerous. Because when we were 30, and we talked about the dream and ideals, to realize them, we found ourselves with very few means. Because there was little competence to work with. It's 30 people, and when there are 1,000, 2,000, there is much more richness. The collective fabric is much richer. So, in the manifestation, if it were lived through this attitude of saying, well, you'll incarnate, and well, you're more competent than me, or you're more competent than him. And each accepts, like each cell accepts its role. Then, trying to be more perfect also in what it does. And that's where the stumbling block is, I believe, in terms of our collective inability. It's about helping each other afterward, to not fall into the trap, even while descending the ladder of incarnation, of egos, convictions, oppositions. Because we believe that this is better than that. So, that's where the group, or groups, that represent themselves, would be there to help, afterward, this manifestation to incarnate, through each of us. That's where there's a marker of brotherhood, instead of saying, you don't agree with me. Or, you don't agree together, so we must say that you're right, and he's wrong. No! We know that, precisely, this human unity is elsewhere, by integrating all this, so there's a richness of knowledge and applications, in collective terms, that we haven't begun to explore, in my opinion. We're just at the beginning, maybe, and that's what's wonderful. Why not, to take this challenge, and say, why not? Indeed, how to incarnate these ideals. How to incarnate the dream. And then, help each other mutually, trying, each time, to undo these oppositions. Good, bad, it's always the duality of the mind. So, the mind is essential, but not at this level. So, we must take another level. That's a bit what I wanted to say in relation to what I was proposing.
Kripa. And I ask myself the question regarding individual responsibility and taking responsibility, or because, if we think about the phrase, Auroville, no army, no police. It's not because there's no police that there's no propriety, no mutual respect, no organization, and delimitation of what's okay, what's not okay, to heal your space, my space. And when you generate something, well, when you exceed something that's not okay. And yet, if there's police or security, if what you do as a neighbor bothers me, I'm going to pick up the phone, I'm going to call, and I'm going to completely de-responsibilize myself. And so, my neighbor bothers me, I call, it's up to you, it's your job, it's up to you to stop them, because they're not supposed to bother me, it bothers me. I completely de-responsibilize myself from the process of coming to see you, creating a link with you, and making you understand that I exist, that I'm here, that your way of functioning and your way of doing things affect me. And there, in this exchange that we'll have together, it will be much richer and much more maturing for the collective than if I call a third-party body of order, of responsibility, saying it's up to you. So, taking personal responsibility with delegation. So yes, and this is really something I deeply believe in, that at some point we delegate a task to someone or to people, and we help to make it happen, because we trust them and we must let them do what they have to do. But at the same time, it's not because I do this that I don't feel concerned anymore.
Well, thank you. We are coming to the end of this first conversation. Others will follow. So, stay connected and see you all very soon. Thank you.
If you would like to take part in this project on the inner being, or if you have any questions or comments for our team or participants, please feel free to contact us using the email at the bottom of this webpage.
This is Auroville Radio, voices from the City of Dawn.